Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinoski. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinoski, your host. I'm joined today by Mike Becker. He is a consultant at Becker Quality Improvements. And I'll preface this with this arose out of the recent assassination of Charlie Kirk. Mike and I have a history on LinkedIn of not agreeing on politics. We're not afraid to challenge each other, but we're also longtime connections dating back to our careers at General Mills. And in the end, I reached out to him because he's always remained respectful to me. I hope I've tried to do the same with him in our discussions. So we want to set an example here today, folks. You don't have to be at each other's throats. So welcome to Manufacturing Talks, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim. I'm glad to be on board with you and agree that, it's good to be respectful. And while we haven't always agreed on LinkedIn, there's only been one or two things probably we have agreed on. We've managed to keep it respectful. And, on our latest discussion on LinkedIn, you invited me to come on Manufacturing Talks, and I thought about it a little bit. I've generally not tried to be an outspoken person on LinkedIn. Once in a while, I do make political comments, but it hasn't been my the way I normally roll.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, why not? And, there's certainly been some crazy things being shouted from both the right and the left about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So I thought, well, let's set an example. So I thought I'd come on board. And of course, we're talking about manufacturing to begin with.
That's right.
And, just give you a little background.
Yeah.
I spent over 30 years with General Mills, and that's where I did run across Jim to begin with. And, my roles were a variety of operations and quality. And during my time as a quality engineer, I got very interested in continuous improvement. Learned a lot about Six Sigma, total productive maintenance. Got very interested in solving problems, whether they were production or quality. And that kind of led me into my current role. When I retired from General Mills in 2021, I didn't want to fully retire from working, so I set up a consulting firm called Becker Quality Improvements. So not the most original name, but in that role, I've done a lot of work, mainly in the food safety arena. But I've done contract roles as quality manager, sanitation manager. I've done a lot of pathogen reduction work in plants, helped companies implement SQF. I've gone in and done gap audits to make sure people are ready for their next audit. Done some quality engineering training and just, try to continue the work I did at General Mills, but with other companies. And been going pretty well for the last 4 years. Not full time. I've probably averaged half-time work, which is plenty as you're kind of trying to roll into retirement, but enjoyed it a lot. Love working with particularly smaller companies, because you can have a really good impact and help them get trained up and really improve their food safety.
Yep.
And I will give a shout out to General Mills that we were very well trained as General Mills employees, and that has carried over into my consulting work.
I couldn't agree more. And I want to go back to that whole broad topic of manufacturing, and then obviously the more specific ones we share from General Mills is, when you've got disagreements with people, there's always going to be something that you have in common if you dig deep enough. And so I'm glad from the start we had that in common. So as some of those disagreements came up, I never went overboard because we always had that common tie. And like you said, we've had agreements on some of the craziness in the manufacturing world as well. From your perspective, and I mean, you mentioned some really great points about food safety, probably some that went over people's heads. So dig in a little more, but what would you say your top 2 or 3 concerns or issues in your part of the manufacturing world right now are?
Okay. Yeah, one thing I've seen in my time working on food safety is companies have a lot of cost pressure, and they struggle to find the time, or maybe it's more they aren't willing to make the time to do a really thorough cleaning to what we call a micro level, and that would be things like salmonella or listeria, because it takes some effort to do a really good job to get the micro things cleaned up, because you can't see them with your naked eye, and so ultimately you have to do some swabbing, and that takes even more time. And what happens is you'll get issues like the boar's head would be a recent example where they had to close a plant in Virginia, and that's been going on probably about a year now. But they had some really horrible sanitation practices, most likely because they weren't putting enough effort into it. Because the way to do a good job is, it's not a secret how to do good cleaning. It just takes some effort and some focus. And complicating
and education, to your point about
education for sure, yes. And one of the other things that was going on in this plant was there was USDA findings because it's a meat plant, so there's inspectors all the time.
Right.
Apparently, that didn't get far enough up the hierarchy at the USDA to really do a good job of, okay, we need to shut these guys down and fix these things, and so it took somebody actually passing away to get them to shut down and clean it up.
Yeah.
And along with that, this would be kind of another food safety potential issue, is the CDC is not going to be as proactive looking for pathogens. They've dropped it from, they generally were looking at 8 different pathogens, and they're only going to look at salmonella and Shigatox and E. coli, which are 2 very serious ones. But the boar's head issue was actually listeria. So are we going to miss an issue like that because we're not communicating or actively looking enough? And that's cost pressure at the federal government level, that's changing that. But that could complicate our work, or maybe you find less problems because you're not looking as hard for them, and could lead to more deaths. It's not a guarantee that it will, but it could.
Yeah, obviously, any illness or death is one too many. But at the same time, I always marvel at where we've gotten from a food safety perspective. So, in your perspective, how are we doing, compared with over the past few decades, and how do you see things progressing?
Well, I can just share my time, which I guess is actually over a few decades when I think about it here.
Yeah.
But in the early 90s, there wasn't as much focus on allergens.
Right.
When I look at how that's changed during my time working in the industry, we didn't really think about it too much. And then all of a sudden you started hearing more and more about allergens, and our cleaning just got immensely better. I mean, we're way better than we were in 1990. And then around 2010 or so, pathogen level cleaning got much, much better, and we started looking for it by swabbing for indicator organisms and doing a thorough job of validating our sanitation.
Yep.
So we're immensely better in the sanitation world. And I would say that's true of the bigger companies for sure.
Yep.
But smaller ones, haven't, I would say, probably aren't quite there yet. And that's normally due to, back to the cost pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you go in and work with smaller companies, which I do frequently, you have a lot of people that they're split. They got jobs, doing 2 jobs, and it's one person. You might be a production and quality person. And frequently, production will win out in that argument because that's where the revenue's coming from.
Right. Yep. Yeah, especially if it's one person who has all that pressure to get the stuff out the door and make the money. Yeah, that's a bit of a difficulty. One thing I wanted to note, just coincidentally, a woman at my church has a grandson who we just learned has salmonella. Didn't hear any details on how he got it, but it got me thinking. I don't know that I ever knew anyone that near to me in my personal life, in my entire life, that I know for a fact ever before had salmonella.
Yeah, and you may never know if you might have had it potentially, and
right,
and
yeah,
you get
without
sick,
knowing.
you get diarrhea or vomit, cramps. Frequently, it all kind of looks the same, and unless you go to the hospital, you don't find out for sure.
Yeah.
And that's where if you're fairly healthy, you'll get sick and probably not get much worse than that. But if you're a older person or
Right.
have some other health issues,
Right.
it's more risky for you.
Well, so speaking of risky, we've opened with that commonality. Now let's get to the meat of this subject. First, I wanted to hear just where your political philosophy, where your personal politics came from, looking back through your life, and then I'll share the same.
Okay, well, early on in I'll say my voting life, so from 18 or so on, my dad would always tell me that Democrats were tax and spend. And this early on was, before I was even a voting age. So this would be during the era of Nixon, somewhere, late 60s, early 70s. And so my first presidential election anyway, I was like on the Ronald Reagan bandwagon. And so I voted Republican initially. And then my big switch was during 1992 when I was watching the RNC convention and Pat Buchanan was giving the keynote. And I was just kind of horrified by his stance on gays and abortion. And I thought he was pretty mean-spirited in how he talked about people on the left and their viewpoints and didn't want to, give gay people the same rights as heterosexual marriages. And I just thought it was kind of hate-filled and really didn't want to align myself with that way of thinking. So I really pretty much switched after that. I voted I might have voted for Jim Leach, I think, a couple of times here in Iowa, who was a Republican, but pretty much I've stayed on the Democratic side since then. So you can blame Pat Buchanan for making me switch, yes.
No, what's interesting though is you're talking about that time frame, and it wouldn't have been unusual to have a Republican like you who was in favor of gay rights or in favor of abortion, and vice versa on the Democrat side, pro-choice Democrats. It's become so polarized now that wasn't the case back then. I understand, your thought around switching, but there was more of an open tent on both sides as well.
Yeah, and abortion has been a wedge issue, and I think
for sure
my history with it or my thinking on it is it definitely was almost always if you're of the Catholic religion, you tended to be anti-abortion. But up until the 70s, I don't think it was really a Protestant issue, but it's kind of turned into a wedge issue. So I think by design, it's been used to be a wedge issue. And,
yep.
But, and it's hard to argue about it because if people are basing their anti-abortion on their faith, how do you argue with them, right? I mean, you just got to say, okay, you have your opinion, I have mine, and I don't want to tell somebody they have a wrong opinion when it's faith-based. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Now I can choose a different point of view, and that doesn't mean I'm a baby murderer either, you know.
Right. Yeah. That nuance has also obviously been kind of cast by the wayside as we've gotten more polarized. So, from my end, it's interesting. My parents weren't ever overtly political. My dad was a member of the NRA, so I grew up reading the American Rifleman magazine. He worked for the federal government. He was in U.S. Forest Service his entire career, and so in some ways, I should have been more on the left side of things in that regard. But even without them really pushing overtly political commentary, it's just to me, it's some of how we lived. I grew up in remote Upper Peninsula, Michigan, where very much more rural and individualized lifestyle. But it really wasn't. I mean, I got into some things in college, but really I was not even too involved in politics till after college, and read a few things along the way. Read Ayn Rand, read some of the more generic things that were from kind of the Austrian economics end of things, like Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. But then I don't know, it just, as my first election was George Bush Sr., and as I looked at issues, it just kind of, to me, was a natural fit more on the right. And then I got very big into it pretty early on and have been an ardent kind of diehard political junkie my entire adult life, kind of conservative / libertarian. And not one major issue. I think it's more the individual liberty piece. Even though my dad made his living from the government, my seeing some of what went on and some of his complaints with that department that he worked for, around where they were supposed to be managing the forests. And I think in many ways he would have said we were mismanaging our forests. And it just became not really trusting what government could do versus what individuals on their own could do. As you think about your own philosophy, were there any authors, thinkers, philosophers, that kind of thing that shaped your view, or was it much more that personal end of things like you talked about earlier?
Well, when I was first heading off to college, I initially thought I was going to be a history teacher.
Oh, okay.
So I kind of got wrapped up into what you might call the usual suspects of the the American Revolution, Washington and Jefferson, Adams.
Yep.
Even up to Andrew Jackson, but pre-Civil War. So I read a lot about those guys, and I mean, it's pretty fascinating how they, in a sense, created our country that we're still trying to maintain after all these years. I have read Ayn Rand some too. I'm not a scholar on it like you probably are, but I read a couple of her Atlas Shrugged for one. But I've got more, I guess you'd call them more recent commentators that, you mentioned Bush Sr. I kind of got into a political jag with W. Bush, and listening to commentators talk about him. And I kind of went on a, 6 or 7 MSNBC jag, which I'm sure is not one of your favorite
no, it is
favorite
not.
cable networks. But, so I was a big Keith Olbermann fan back in
Yep.
Middle 2010s there, I guess you'd call it. Listen to him once in a while on podcasts now. So he's still out there trying to get the word out. But now I listen to more podcasts, Planet Money and Today Explained from Vox, and more stuff about Slate Money and things like that. Not so political oriented always, ultimately a lot of things are political oriented, even though they don't seem like they might be. So if you're talking about the economy, well, ultimately that's driven by politics quite a bit too. And even things like the Fed, Fed's getting a lot of pressure now to lower interest rates from Trump. Well, they're supposed to be separate, but they're he's trying to exert influence.
What do you think about interest rates currently?
Well, I mean, compared to different times in my lifetime, they're not so high, but we had 20 years of ridiculously low interest rates, and now people think they're really high. Well, I had a house loan in 2000 that was 8.25. Now you can probably get one for 6.25, which people think is high. And I go, no, that ain't high.
My first house loan was 11%, and so on the nuances we may disagree, but I agree entirely there. Unfortunately, you had easy money for so darn long. You've got this major portion of the population that thinks, geez, you go over 5%, it's the end of the world.
Yeah,
they were well over 5% for most of my young adult life.
I remember my grandpa had certificates of deposit. He was getting 16% on.
Yeah.
I'd love to get 16% on a CD right now.
Not happening. When you think about kind of the basic things, to me, it boils down to government intervention and control versus individual liberty. Are there guiding principles that you fall back on there?
Well, I think ultimately what government needs to be thinking about is trying to do the most good for the most people, which sometimes might interfere with individual liberties. But there's certain things that I think government really has to take the charge of. I mean, highways would be like one example that I think it makes sense to have. If you're talking about federal highways, well, the government should build those. Now, granted, you could make a case that there could be toll roads. In fact, I had a professor, economics professor, that would maintain that everything could be privately done, and going to use a libertarian, which you probably Milton Friedman fan, of course, right? So, you could make a case for how private industry could do everything, but I think in many cases it makes more sense to do things with tax dollars, and then we all can use we can all drive on I-80 and go east to west, and then that I think that's reasonable. Certainly defense is another one. There's probably things the government does that they wouldn't need to do, and maybe they don't do a good job at, and then maybe that's the time to have the conversation. How could we do this better? You could look at it as if something is causing a problem, okay, how do we first agree, okay, this is a problem, and then how do we fix it? So if there's something, like Elon Musk doing all this cost cutting, there is a problem there. Now, I don't really care for how he went about it because, cutting things willy-nilly doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think in some cases you could argue they overcut. So we're not getting some services that we should. But does government spend too much money? Yes. So, but where should we cut it? And could we do it more thoughtfully? So I don't know what you thought about the what you call the Doge effort.
Well, there's my kind of extremist idealist point, which would be cut everything as much as you can right away because we're $37 trillion in debt. That being said, there's also the fact that we've got our whole network of economic systems that, like it or not, have become intertwined with government spending in every way and everything. And so when you start cutting willy-nilly, what are the unforeseen effects? That's what makes it so darn difficult, though. I mean, there are a couple things that are just going to make it, to me, pretty well impossible to get the debt monster under control. One is that, to do it in a measured way, you're not going to be able to cut enough to make a difference. The other thing is just all the spending that's on autopilot now that would take literally an act of Congress to change. More fundamentally, I look at, I don't know, maybe I just took my dad's complaints to an extreme about the mismanagement he saw, but I just see government screwing things up so badly. And it comes down to, yes, private actors can certainly screw things up badly too. I just published an article right before we got on about private equity and some of the horror stories in the manufacturing world that we're trying to sort through and get past so we can get the investment we need for reindustrialization. But private equity's made a hash of things in a lot of ways. Thing is, with government, so many times you can't opt out. No one had to take the private equity money, but I didn't have a choice on Social Security, and I'm going to get roundly screwed on that.
Yeah, potentially. That's could get cut.
I think so.
I haven't started it yet.
Okay.
So I'm hoping it doesn't get cut soon.
Well, then, isn't that unfortunate though? I'm kind of in the same boat. Geez, should I go early? I'm not officially retired yet, but I'm close. And what makes the most sense? You look at the projections, and they're based on no cuts whatsoever. And I don't think that's reality in any way.
Well, it's kind of a math problem, and the one thing you need to know is unknowable. It's how long are you going to live.
Yeah.
If you knew that, then you
could
tell when you want to take it.
Right. Yep. What would you say your top 2 or 3 political issues are right now?
Well, I think right at the moment it's what you might call the political violence, because we had the assassination, and then there's the even from the White House, there was a lot of discussion about radical leftists are doing terrorist acts, and Pam Bondi saying she's just going to go after people, and that's just, the rhetoric doesn't help, right? And then in a lot of the violence, not even necessarily political, but a lot of the violence is white men. It's like, well, what's going on there? Is it mental health, or what is causing this, and how do we fix it? If it is mental health, well, let's fund some mental health programs. But that the rhetoric has to be toned down, and I don't know how to do that. I mean, we're trying to have a conversation, and we're not yelling at each other. If more people could do that, maybe it'd be better. But I think people make a lot of money by getting people amped up. When you look at Rush Limbaugh as an example, he had 30 years of really getting his ditto heads going, made a lot of money getting people fired up. Did he even believe what he was saying? I don't know. My dad loved him, I know that. And but people make a lot of money getting people excited. So I mean, I don't know how it's going to stop.
Yeah, and obviously the internet and social media certainly hasn't helped in that regard.
Yeah, that's true too. I mean, it gets you can even see that on LinkedIn, where we've gone back and forth a couple times. Every once in a while, people get pretty hate spewing, and you think, well, that maybe you should take to Twitter, but it'd be better not to say some things, or type them out loud, so to speak. But the other thing I think is a big deal about our ability maybe to come together or not is some of the arguments coming from the right, I'll say, are Christian nationalist, meaning that they're pulling Christianity in to their argument than saying you have to follow this. Now, I don't have anything against Christianity, but there's other religions, I mean, we're supposed to be this melting pot of people. So you have Jewish people, you have Muslims, and, we all should be able to live together in peace. But if you're trying to drive Christianity as the main focus of the U.S. government, it's not going to work because there's other people that, have freedom of religion and freedom from religion. Maybe they don't even believe. Well, that's okay too. So if you're trying to drive the Christian nationalist perspective, you really can't have agreement because it just isn't going to work. And I don't see how we get around that because when you look at, like J.D. Vance, for example, that's how he's speaking, certainly. And Charlie Kirk, I think, did too. So I don't know what to do about that one.
Yeah, and I have a concern around that. It goes beyond religion. It or beyond, I guess, classical religious categories, because now, to me, some non-religious beliefs have become religious. I think about some of what's touted as science, some of the discussions around transgender issues or climate, where for a while there you literally couldn't say something that was outside the narrative, or you could lose your job, be doxxed, be put into danger. That kind of thing coming from either side is unacceptable. And I agree with you entirely. It's a freedom thing. So you can believe what you want if you're using the power of the state to enforce your beliefs and force them on other people. Now, yeah, we're way outside the way the nation was founded. And yeah, so Pam Biondi talking about going after people for saying things now is unfortunate because it's just continuing the things that we saw with cancel culture 5 years ago. Yeah. But there's also that notion that, well, you guys did it first, so now you're going to get what's coming to you. And another unfortunate thing in the tenor of our times. Yeah.
Well, you bring up transgender people. I think we have to acknowledge they exist and they shouldn't be discriminated against. But what you think about them, can be your own personal opinion, right? I mean, but I don't think they should not get a job because they're transgender.
Absolutely not. No.
So we got to kind of acknowledge that people come in all kind of shapes and forms and beliefs, and they should all be accepted. If they can do the job, they should be able to get the job. And if you didn't get the job because a person of color got the job, that doesn't mean they were a diversity hire. It means they consider more competent. So
maybe. I can tell you straight up, I could give you very clear examples of when I was personally discriminated against. There was not even any hiding it. And, in the legal situation at that time, I had nothing to stand on. If that happened today, actually, with some recent court rulings, I could sue and potentially win. Back when it happened, that wasn't even a possibility. So, it's unfortunate if that happens to anybody. And obviously, there's a long history of some people having much worse happen to them. I just don't think reversing that and discriminating against innocent people today is any kind of solution.
No, I'm not saying we should discriminate, but it concerns me when people say they didn't get the job because a black person got the job instead of them. And,
the assumption is absolutely not valid without evidence. But again, that's one of the downsides of those programs is it makes that assumption all too easy a fallback, right? So,
Yeah, and the question is how to fix past wrongs.
yep.
'Cause certainly, I mean, if you think about, some of this stuff we're talking about goes back to Reconstruction and how that was messed up, and you ended up flowing into Jim Crow and lynchings and redlining. I mean, a whole laundry list of things, and that went on until the civil rights movement in the '60s. So I mean, it's crazy. But then, how do you fix that? And an example of how things sort of get messed up. I mentioned I was interested in history. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I went through all these history classes, U.S. history. I never heard of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Like, well, how did we miss this? Who's teaching it? Who talks about the Wounded Knee Massacre on the Native American side? It's like, we did all these bad things. Nobody's learning about them. Does that mean we're going to repeat them? Does that mean we're racist because we didn't learn about them? I don't know, but it's all part of our history. We should learn it.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I'm a history buff myself. A good example there is I knew there was discrimination in World War II, but the extent of it, I actually learned from a British author just a few years ago. And so, no, I mean, it's not about sweeping things under the rug either. To get to the root cause, we should have those open discussions and get all the facts on the table. To that end, we're almost out of time. I want your thoughts on, we've talked a lot about how we're at odds and at each other's throats. What are your top ideas on how we start turning that back and come together as Americans again for a change?
Well, I wonder if we got a few years till the next presidential race, but maybe the two candidates at that time could have more of a one-on-one kind of discussion instead of, those debates are kind of a waste of time, with gotcha questions and, whether there's fact checking or not, all this kind of stuff that kind of comes up. But give them some topics to talk about. Maybe one person sent, like you just sent me some questions to think about. Well, they could send questions to each other and have a fireside chat with a cigar and a glass of bourbon or something. It's like this is just
now that I
real.
like. Right. Have a rational discussion for a change.
Yeah.
I like it. To me, I was inspired to reach out to you because I was actually part of a podcast back 5 years ago or so that was specifically around bringing two very different sides, several people together who have diametrically opposing viewpoints and having a discussion like we've had here today. So, I was inspired by my friend Kevin Blue out in California who put that together, and I told him the other day, I'm rehashing your philosophy here on my show. So thanks to Kevin for inspiring me to reach out to you, Mike, because I think we've had a good discussion here today.
Well, that sounds good. I appreciate the invite, and you're officially my first podcast.
All right. Well, good for you. You should do more. You did well.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming on. And, maybe as the next round of elections comes closer, you and I can get that bourbon and cigar and maybe not next to the fire, but here across the computer, we can get another chat.
I can wander over to the UP sometime.
There we go. Thank you so much, Mike.
All right. Take care, Jim. Appreciate it.
And as always, thanks to you and the audience. This was very different, but, this to me is one of the most important shows I had. So I don't know that I'm going to beat it on the importance of the topic, but we're here every Tuesday. I'll try to beat it in some regard when we come back, try to do that continuous improvement thing. So until then, I'm Jim Vinoski with Manufacturing Talks, signing off. So long.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinoski. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.